Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us this evening. This is John McDougall. I am the event coordinator here at Murder by the Book in Houston, coming to you with another live virtual event. I always feel like, so I don't remember the last one of these I did. It was sometime last week. So I always feel like it's been forever since I've done one. So it's good to see everybody this evening. We have a lot of great stuff coming up. So tomorrow at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, McKenna is going to be chatting with Hannah Dennison. And then we're super excited. We'll hope that you will come back and see us at 7:30 Central on Friday night. As many of you know, BoucherCon, the big mystery convention, was canceled this year because of the Delta variant. And so they've got a couple of virtual things they're doing. The Anthony events are virtual. Tomorrow, Alifair Burke is going to be chatting with her father, James Lee Burke, virtually as well. You can find more about that at BoucherCon. But one of the things that was supposed to happen at the convention was the crime writers of color and the queer crime writers were getting together, and they were going to be hosting an open house for underrepresented voices. It was going to be a reception. They were going to have authors reading. And so we were so bummed that it wasn't going to be able to happen. But we have teamed up with the crime writers of color, and tomorrow night at 7:30, we are going to be hosting that here on our Facebook and our YouTube channel. Alex Segura and Kelly Garrett are going to be the ones who are going to be emceeing the whole thing. And we're going to have readings from David Heska, Wambly Wyden, Wanda Morris, Raquel Reyes, John Copenhaver, and Tori Eldridge, as well as featuring the books by the authors that were supposed to appear at the reception. So I hope that you will come see us tomorrow night at 7:30 to check that out. Also wanted to mention, as many of you may know, we had a handful of events on the calendar for September in store. We started scheduling them in June, and it seemed like we would be able to have a couple of author events in store, but we have since canceled all of those. So you can check the website to figure out whether or not we've moved them virtual or what's happening with them. So at this moment, we're not exactly sure when we're going to start doing in-store stuff yet, but it seems like it was not a great idea to try to do that with the Delta variant and the ICU situation here in Houston. But we do hope that you will come visit us. We are open. We are now requiring masks in the store. Before we were just encouraging them, but now we're asking that you do mask up when you come in. But we hope that you will come see us. And if you are not getting out and about, you can always do curbside pickup. We're happy to run books out for you. But I'm going to get us started for this evening and get our authors brought out. We're so excited to have Zoje Stage and May Cobb with us. May is going to be leading the discussion, so we are going to bring her out first. How are you tonight, May?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited.
Thanks for doing this for us. So May's recent release, The Hunting Wives, came out in May, and May Cobb earned her MA in literature from San Francisco State University, and her essays and interviews have appeared in the Washington Post, the Rumpus, Edible Austin, and Austin Monthly. Her debut novel, Big Woods, won multiple awards. A Texas native, she lives in Austin, Texas with her family. And now we're going to bring out Zoje. How are you this evening?
I'm good, thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So Zoje's newest book, Getaway, came out on August 17th. She is the USA Today and internationally best-selling author of Baby Teeth, a former filmmaker with a penchant for the dark and suspenseful. She lives in Pittsburgh. As they are chatting this evening, if you guys have questions for either author, you can either post those in the comments on Facebook or the live chat on YouTube, and we will get to those in a little bit. If you want more information about either author or some more detailed info about their books, I have also dropped a link in the comments in both places so you can see more about their books and also order copies if you were so inclined, which we hope you will be. So for now, May, I am going to turn it over to you to let you guys chat, and I will see you in just a little bit.
Thanks, John.
Hi, May.
Hey, Zoje. It's so good to see you. Thanks for letting me do this with you. You know, I've been a big fan of yours for a while now.
I'm super excited, and the feeling's mutual, so yay. It's like chatting with an old friend.
I know. I'm so excited, and one day in person.
Yes, yes.
Well, welcome everyone. Zoje and I are so happy to be here at Murder by the Book, one of our very favorite, most awesome, independent bookseller. And if you're inclined to purchase Getaway, which I just don't know why you wouldn't be, because it is one of my favorite thrillers of all time. Definitely don't plan on doing anything, like in the next day or two if you get it, because you won't be able to put it down. But if you'd like to order it from Murder, I'd highly recommend it. They ship quickly. They're awesome. So let's get started. Yeah, Zoje and I met probably the summer of 2018. We both had our debut thrillers coming out. Hers was Baby Teeth, and it totally blew me away. And I think I slid into your DMs on Twitter and started asking you questions, and you were nice enough to answer my stuff about publishing. And anyway, I've just been such a big fan ever since.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I've been a big fan of yours too. I remember reading Big Woods. I remember taking a picture of it, posting it on Instagram. So.
Thank you. And earlier this year, I had the intense pleasure of reading Getaway early before it was released. And I got to be honest, like during 2020, I was having the most difficult time reading, which is something I'm usually addicted to, but I could not focus. I had a hard time focusing on anything other than the news cycle. So yeah, I don't know if you had that same issue, but yeah. But when I got your book, all that changed because I literally could not put it down. It completely sucked me in, gripped me from the first page. And the last 100 pages, I literally found myself holding my breath in places because I just had no idea what was going to happen next. And for those of you who haven't, read it yet, the quick synopsis is Getaway is about 3 lifelong friends, and 2 of those are sisters who've drifted apart, and they're coming back together to go on a backpacking trip in the Grand Canyon, and they're each sort of looking for a break in their, everyday reality for different reasons. And all seems well until their supplies start to vanish, and it becomes pretty clear that they're not alone. And I don't want to this is going to be spoiler free, but they're being stalked by someone, and it's so creepy, and you will never want to go hiking again without a very large group. So yeah, and this book has earned so much buzz and praise. Entertainment Weekly did the cover reveal, and they said that Zoje is continuing her run as the master of the psychological thriller. I couldn't agree more. And Zibby Owens just featured Getaway on Good Day LA, which was so cool to see. Was that just so awesome?
Yes, that was the first time I'd ever seen a picture of myself, a picture of my book on television. So that was super cool.
So exciting. So I guess my first question is, Getaway takes place largely in the Grand Canyon, and in researching for tonight, I read that it was loosely inspired on a story about a trip there with your family when you were younger. I think it's middle school, right?
I was 18 on that trip.
Oh, okay.
But the first time I did go backpacking in the Grand Canyon, I was 13. You might have seen some of those other pictures because I was posting from both of those trips. So yeah.
And can you talk a little bit about the one specific story where you and your parents and sister were at a more of a remote place and you kind of crossed paths with someone a little shady?
Yeah. My family and I, so it was my mom, my dad, my sister, and me. I was 18. Were on, I think it was a 6-day backpacking trip in the Grand Canyon, and we were spending like each night at different places within the canyon. So it was a night that we were spending at a very remote place called Salt. And Salt is, the way it's set up, there's like one designated camping spot because it's kind of this place on the edge of a butte in the middle of absolutely nowhere. So there really isn't space for anybody else to camp there. And my family had the permit for being there for that night. And as we were setting up our stuff, we have a pretty informal camping area. It's not like we put up a tent exactly. But anyway, this guy came by. And when I was thinking about, a novel idea, and I was trying to remember like exactly what happened when that guy came by, because I remembered it being odd and it left like this really weird impression on me. And in my fanciful creative memory of it, the guy looked like the gunslinger from the Stephen King book. And I knew I was wrong. I knew that was not the case. But in my mind, like that's what he looked like. And he had a hip holster and a gun. I'm like, I knew I was wrong. So I asked my sister what she remembered about that night that we were at Salt, and if she remembered when the guy came by. She said, yeah. She said, he said he had just gotten out of prison. And I was like, okay, yeah. And then I started to jog my memory a little bit. So then I asked my dad, because my dad remembers everything about every Grand Canyon trip. And my dad proceeds to like lay out the whole story of when the guy came by. So the guy came by, he started talking with us. And I do remember that we were all just kind of lingering around listening to this guy. And he proceeds to tell us that he had just gotten out of prison and he was just kind of wandering around the Grand Canyon by himself. And just very casually, he reports that at some point he realized when he had crossed paths with a lone female ranger that he could have picked up a rock and bashed her in the head and no one would have ever known. And what I didn't know until I was asking my dad about this is my dad was then like looking around surreptitiously, like in case he needed a rock as a weapon. We didn't know what this guy was going to do.
Again,
In our story, it was very anticlimactic and the guy walked on. But, you know, as with many things that sort of generate ideas for novels, it became this what if a group of people were backpacking and they met a guy who was a little sketchy and he didn't walk on. So
yeah,
that was the inspiration.
that's a pretty creepy story though. And I mean, talk about, you know, pre-cell phone times, and there's probably not even cell service there anyway.
There isn't, but
Yeah, but that's pretty creepy. And I also wanted to ask, the novel opens with the main character, and I don't want to mispronounce her name, but is it Imogen or
Imogen.
Imogen? And she's recalling the harrowing day of a massacre at a synagogue in Pittsburgh, where you're from originally and where you now live. And I just wanted to ask, like, I mean, I can't imagine what it was like being there in 2018 when that massacre happened. And also, can you just tell us a little bit more about that and how that informed her character and her character's arc?
Yeah, you know, as you said, I mean, I not only live in Pittsburgh, I live in the neighborhood where that happened. And at the time, I actually lived within a few blocks of where that happened. And it was such a creepy day. It was Saturday, which that's the day that people go to synagogue in the Jewish faith. And I was actually getting ready to go to a book event, to a library event for Baby Teeth. And ordinarily, like, I would not have turned on the news. I would probably not have known that that was going on, but I wanted to have something to eat before I went to the event. And I turned on the news, and much to my shock, it was about my neighborhood. And I was just in absolute shock. And, you know, at that time, nobody knew exactly what the status was with the gunman, if there was only one gunman. And, you know, meanwhile, my sister was coming into town to pick me up. And I was like, oh my God, what is my sister driving into? And I'm thinking about all of the people in my neighborhood who walked to synagogue. And I'm like, what is going to happen? It was so bizarre. And I had considered not going to my book event because it just seemed so trivial to go talk about a book when this was going on. But I ended up going because it just, you know, it seemed it was an obligation and I didn't want to disappoint people. And honestly, it ended up being something that I think all of us kind of needed to just be there and talk to each other. And of course, we just kept talking about this is so weird that this is happening. But I think having that little sense of community in that moment was really helpful.
Yeah.
So as with many things in my life, they do find their way into my characters in certain ways. I think it's how I process a lot of things in the world is by writing. But Imogen's situation was a little bit more specific in that she had recently started going to this synagogue and trying to explore her Jewish faith a little bit more. And as she was approaching the building that morning, she heard gunfire and she was afraid. So she like ran to the side of the building and hid in a bush. And part of her whole psyche, and this is like where it starts in the book and in her life, is she's never forgiven herself for that moment. Even though realistically, what could she have done against a gunman? But she never forgave herself for just running off and hiding. So that sort of like sets this level in her trajectory of her character arc, because she has such an idea of needing to redeem herself. And that becomes a very important idea later in the book.
Yes, I found that to be so compelling. And again, we'll keep this spoiler free, but that really was, that's one thing I really loved about the book so much, was that you have the outer suspense of what happens when they realize they're not alone. And then you have the inner suspense of, well, I'll just go ahead into my next question, which is, early on they reference the thing, and it's something, it's an event that happens that sort of tore apart Imogen's friendship with Tilda in particular. And it's something that Beck, Imogen's sister, is keen on sort of bringing out. And I thought that was really, really clever, because you do have this other layer of suspense, and then you have that inner psychological suspense going on at the same time, and the reader wants to know what did happen. Why are these friends seemingly at odds with each other? Did you know that starting out that would be the way it went? Here's where I'm getting into your plotting secrets that you have to hand over. Do you plot ahead of times? Because you had a lot of really cool twists in there, and I'm like wondering, did she know this was going to happen? Or
yeah, I wish I knew what individual ones, but I know we can't, give away spoilers. So a more general answer would be, I am a pantser, so I don't write with an outline. And my first draft, sometimes my first drafts are really quite different than what the end result ends up being. But I always know before I start writing a novel, like I know where the novel begins, and I know something that happens in the middle, and I know, if not the final chapter, I know something that's happening near the end, like what the resolution is. So I'm always writing towards that. But in terms of all of the details of the twists and turns, I mean, obviously there's some in the first draft, but I would say that it gets a lot more finessed in the later drafts. And especially with some of that conflict with the characters, and even some of the psychology with Imogen, that happened more in the second and third draft, because that notion of trauma, became very, very much part of what Imogen how she could process this experience and make it valuable for her. Let's put it that way. Yeah. So if she had not had that trauma initially, she actually wouldn't have had as great a need as she has in the novel to really find out something critically important about herself, about what she can do in a moment of crisis. And the other thing that I really wanted to explore, and this still touches on the psychology, is the friendships and the relationships. It's like, Tilda and Imogen did manage to stay friends for some amount of time, so some number of years following the thing, because both of them kind of perceived it differently at the time that it happened. And then this is how Beck kind of catches on to it. Imogen is a novelist, and she writes a book, and it's when her sister reads the draft of this book that she realizes that Imogen is still haunted by this thing that happened so many years ago. And it's really as Imogen has become more aware of like what that event really meant, then it does make her relationship with Tilda even more tense. So Beck has this idea that she can like fix everything, and she can fix them. And if she takes them on this trip, they're going to have this amazing opportunity to work out all of their crap, and everything's going to be great. But of course, they have other things they need to deal with too, while still trying to deal with some of these psychological issues from the past.
Yes, they do. And we'll get to that. We'll get to that in a minute. But I really loved the characters so much. I loved Imogen's, she's a novelist, but at the moment, she's kind of hit with writer's block. Beck's a doctor, I think a little more type A. Like you said, she thinks she can fix everything. And then you've got Tilda, who I just really loved her character, because she's like sort of this like influencer who, kind of doesn't, she doesn't want to peel herself off of Instagram for the trip, but she does anyway. And I just, were any of those characters based on people in your life? And if that's such an annoying question, you don't have to answer it. But I didn't know if like certain friendships informed, this story, because they do for mine sometimes, even if I won't admit it out loud.
Yeah, I mean, in the most basic sense, this trio of friends was somewhat inspired by a trio of friends that I have with my sister and with our friend from high school. But the needs for the story made all of those characters completely different. I know that when my sister and my friend read the book, like they're trying to look for parts of themselves in it. I'm like, you guys, I had to go with the needs of the story. I needed to give them flaws and ugly moments and stresses and conflict. I'm like, I don't think you should be digging too deep looking for yourself. But with that said, like there are a lot of similarities between me and Imogen in terms of like how I think. She very much thinks like a writer. And as this misadventure unfolds, she's kind of analyzing it a bit as if she were in a novel or writing a novel, and how would she work it out. So I will cop to being somewhat like Imogen, but I would not want to say that anybody was actually like Beck and Tilda. Not that I don't like Beck and Tilda. I love them, but they are very different from my own trio. So
yeah. And I think, and maybe that's why I loved Imogen so much, is I could so relate to her and her thinking about everything. And it was like, wow, it was just so viscerally real and so relatable. And at first, Tilda was not the most sympathetic character. You're sort of set up to go. But then as it wore on, she really does, you really do you feel sympathy for her. And I just thought that was so brilliant, because I love books about female friendships, especially complicated female friendships. Yeah. I didn't know if you had any inspiration or favorite books that deal with that off the top of your head.
Not specifically off the top of my head. I mean, I know when I write a book, I always take that advice that they say of write the book that you want to read. Like I take that super, super seriously. And so I really did want to write a book about a trio of friendships and having distance. Right now where it starts, Tilda and Imogen are somewhat estranged, but they still have this long, deep history together. And I like this idea of being able to explore, can these women find their way back to each other emotionally? And, can they really fight for this long-term relationship? Because, it's really hard as you get older, and none of us stay necessarily where we were born. I mean, I'm back here, but, everybody moves off and does different things. But some of your oldest friends are still your best friends, even when you don't see them very often. So I liked being able to explore how these two women could at least explore the possibility of having that tight bond again.
Yeah, I love that, because it is so relatable, like especially today. It's rare that you're going to live in the same town with your best friend. And when you get back together with them after even 2 years, 5 years, it's a little bit of a collision at first until you find that groove, and yours, of course, in the novel is way more dramatic and amplified, and it's a thriller. But I do think that's so relatable for everybody, because it's like, what's that saying? Like, would we be friends now if we had met now? Yeah. Right. And I think you might even say that in the book, or Imogen might think so. I can't remember, but it hit upon that thinking, like, because I have certain friends that I've known forever, and no way we would be friends right now if we met on the street. Like that.
I know, I think about that sometimes, and I think even with my friends that I've had for decades, that sometimes we wonder. And it's especially strange, like you look at different periods of your life, and certain periods we're like, no, we wouldn't have been friends if we met in 1993, but oh, if we met in 2001, yeah, maybe we would have been friends, because we're all going through these changes. So, I mean, a friendship in that sense, it's very much like this, of kind of going in and out. But those really, really good long-term friendships, you have so much history with people, and it's hard to ever give up that history, even if you do have stresses or conflicts between you. There's just something about being able to say, do you remember when, and having somebody who was there for all of the things that you remember. It's like, it's irreplaceable. So
It is, absolutely. Um, and I also, just another thing I really loved is, well, your writing always is just, it's so gorgeous and so crisp, and it's also so very cinematic. Like when I was reading Getaway, I could just, I was at the Grand Canyon, even though I've never stepped foot there. You know, the sights, the smells, the sounds, the weather, everything. It was so transportive. And I don't know, it feels like there should be a film in the works. Can you speak about that? I know that always stayed, okay, all right, good enough answer.
Yeah, I don't, the rights are still available. I mean, I do have a film agent shopping the rights around, but as of present, I haven't heard of any interest. So we'll just keep our fingers crossed for that one.
Yeah, it would be incredible. And I know you have a strong film background and screenwriting background. Do you think that informs the way you approach novel writing at all?
It probably does, and not intentionally, but I pursued my film dreams for decades, and learned to think in a certain way, which is, everything for me starts with a visual. So I think I am very visual in the way that I think, and I think of scenes in terms of how they would be staged, and almost like, what do they look like? I mean, it's in my head, but it's like, well, what does it look like if that was on a screen and I was watching that? So there is something that's sort of natural for me about staging the scenes that I write, almost as if the readers were watching it, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. It really comes across. That's one of the things I love so much about your novels, is that you're wholly in the world. I mean, really, like they're so fabulously cinematic. Yeah, I was gonna ask too, Gail. Let's get to the creepy villain. He is such a creepy villain. He really got under my skin, and there was something. I thought you did it so brilliantly in the way that I'm not trying to project, but the way I perceived that you used his character to also make social commentary about, a lot of intolerance in this country, and how a lot of people have kind of gone to that side, maybe under the influence of the former person that was in charge. I don't even want to call him the president, but he resonated with me so strongly because he felt so timely. And I guess also, even though he is completely despicable, and I wanted to get like a hiking boot and go to town on him, he also at times is you feel sympathy for him. You feel sorry for him. Was that intentional?
Oh, yes. Yeah. I mean, for me, that was like the critical element of his character, was that he had to have enough moments where readers would think and understand him as a person, that he wasn't just a boogeyman, because that would be too obvious. If he were just a boogeyman, it would be very obvious what Imogen, Tilda, and Beck should do about the situation. But, one of the things that really strikes Imogen is she relates to his weaknesses, and she sees his weaknesses, and she sees his struggles and the things that he wouldn't have wanted in his life, but that's what happened. And she has this idea, perhaps because she's a writer, that she can relate to him on that level. And I don't think she necessarily seeks to bond with him quite as much as maybe what happens, but she wants him to see them as human, and that becomes her path to doing that. All of those psychological elements wouldn't happen if he was just a boogeyman, if he was just straight up evil. So that was very intentional, and I think it's another layer of the psychology in the book. I really think of the book as psychological suspense. I know it may be called any number of other things, but it's really working on the internal psychological issues that Imogen has, and then this like larger psychological issue of trying to think their way out of this situation. So, you know, and none of that would be possible if it was just that he was going to use his fists the whole time. But then it would just be a really clear-cut action, fight your way out kind of story. And that's never what I'm interested in. I always like, and I did this with Baby Teeth also, you know, to take a character that you think you want to hate, but then you start to realize there's more to that person than you first assumed. And then similarly, I mean, I will think about those things even with myself too. It's, you know, I'm not afraid to explore my own dark sides or my own negative aspects, because I think ultimately everyone is some combination of both of those things, and that it's more interesting to think of everyone as being both of those things, that we all have our good moments and our regrettable moments, but that's what makes us complex people who can relate to other people because they go through those things too.
Wow. Well, okay, that's the most incredible answer ever. And I really did enjoy the way you layered in Gail and his backstory. And he was with them. Well, I'm not going to spoil anything, but I liked the amount of time that we got with him. Like you said, he wasn't just a boogeyman that popped out, and it wasn't just about jump scares and, you know, like just, oh my God, I'm scared of that. It really was this kind of cat and mouse psychological suspense. And that's what, I mean, that's when I pick up a thriller, that's what I want to read more than anything, is because that just makes everything tick. So you really pulled it off so well with this one. I really haven't held my breath literally reading a book in a long time, but I have to just flash the cover. And the cover's so great. Can we just talk about the cover for a second? Was this like, I know sometimes you get presented different covers. Was this one of the first and they hit it out of the park, or did y'all work towards this?
Yeah, I mean, I was not consulted about the cover, and so I had no idea what I was going to be shown. And except for tweaking a couple little colors, it's like I was shown that, and I was like, oh my God, because it was a chilling image, you know, that it took something so beautiful as the Grand Canyon, and it did make it scary. Like, I think that's kind of a frightening depiction of the Grand Canyon. So yes, I was very happy with the cover art.
Yes, it's just absolutely gripping and stunning, and it also just screams like, you know, vacation read, and and so to the audience, like, it's a great summer read, but it does take place in October, right? So it's a great fall read too. It's a great winter read. I hope everyone buys it, and then we can gush later together over on social media about it. I wanted to also ask, I'm curious as to what your favorite books recently have been, and, you know, maybe like what's on your nightstand right now.
Yeah, well, what I'm reading right this minute is Dream Girl by Laura Lippman. It's naked. I got a naked book. I do have the cover, but I often take the jackets off when I read so I don't mess them up. Plus, you know, as much as I love jacket art, I also really love a naked book. Anyway,
I do
so
too.
I'm reading that right now, and I'm really impressed with this book. It's very interesting. It is about an author, and I always love to read an author writing about another professional author. It's endlessly fascinating. But yeah, I had the same experience as you did in 2020 where like my brain was broken. I could not concentrate on books. And it just, it was so weird. It's like we had all this time, but seemed harder to make the time go by during 2020. But fortunately, I don't know if it's in contrast to that, but in 2021, I've read so many good books this year. So I have a cheat sheet because my brain will not remember the names of anything. Don't Look for Me by Wendy Walker. That was a really good thriller. Red Widow by Alma Katsu. I haven't read a lot of like spy thrillers. I really liked that. That was really cool.
Dying to read both those.
Yeah. And then I read a couple books that I blurbed, so they aren't quite out yet. But Dark Things I Adore by Katie Latari. And it's kind of an art world / academia / wilderness of Maine psychological thriller. It's a beautifully written book. It's dark, it's haunting, it's very, very interesting. And then another book I absolutely loved, Cackle by Rachel Harrison. That book is so fun. I also talk about covers. I love the cover of that book so much. Like I want to frame her cover on my wall. I love that cover so much. And I think that comes out in October. And that book was fun. I kind of described it as a gal pal Addams family in like the best way. It was just really fun. So
I need to get that one for sure. Yeah. All of the ones you just talked about, I'm going to get that. Thank you.
Yes, they were good.
And I guess I would also just like, when you pivoted from the film world into novel writing, was there a particular book or author that inspired you to get into crime fiction, or a favorite? Like if someone said, what, out of all the books, or it doesn't even have to be just one, but what are like some of your biggest influences in this genre?
I mean, in terms of what got me into writing novels, there wasn't a specific book or writer. And Baby Teeth actually had been based on a screenplay.
Okay.
I should say inspired by a screenplay that I had written. So I guess I was already dabbling in that genre a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the writer who influenced me the most in terms of genre, and this is going to seem like it's not relevant because she does not write thrillers or crime fiction, but Ursula Le Guin.
Yeah.
And the reason was she was the first author who I really saw use genre in a way to explore human behavior and society and how human beings function together. And I was so fascinated by her explanation, or her exploration of society and the dark aspects of society, the oppressive aspects of society, and to do it within the context of genre fiction. Admittedly, it was more science fiction fantasy, but it really made me realize that you can do important things in genre, and I really loved that. And it made me aspire to do important things in genre. So I'm trying. I know I'm not Ursula Le Guin yet, but I'm trying.
Yeah, you are doing amazing, and I'm well aware of her, but I have not read her yet. So if I'm going to grab one of her books, is there one more than the other that you would shove at me first?
It's so interesting because I have not read her books terribly recently. Okay. And sometimes when you go back and you read something that was really influential, and it's like 20 years later, you have such a different perspective on it.
Totally.
So, I mean, the book that I know that like really got me thinking was The Dispossessed.
Okay.
And another of her books, like that a lot of people start with, The Left Hand of Darkness.
Okay.
A lot of people, like, they only have read a couple of her biggest titles, but she actually wrote within a world and wrote many, many, many smaller novels and novellas within that world. And it was really when I sort of did that deep dive into reading her world and could see more broadly how she was exploring human history and how societies form and how various kinds of oppression function in a society. And I was reading kind of the broader, stories that I could kind of see that whole picture. So I don't know if you want to read her entire library, but
the Dispossessed, that's just a great title. Like,
and The Left Hand of Darkness. What a strange title.
Yeah, that's a great title too. I love it. And I guess, I feel like sometimes with these events, there's probably a lot of fellow writers in the audience. And I would just ask, like, if you could give, writers any advice that are, maybe starting out or looking to break into publishing, like what would be some of your top tips?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to have just one tip because I feel like what a writer needs who's just writing their first novel is different than a writer who's trying to find an agent. And then that's a little bit different than like a published author who's now navigating the industry. But I think, one tip that I do like to give to people is to really try to finish what you start. And that sounds so obvious, but I know so many people who, for whatever reason, set aside their projects and move on. And I feel like, if you can get that first draft, even if it's a bad first draft or it's a too short first draft, whatever it is, that's what all of us do, is we have our crappy first draft and then we work on it more. And I think it can be intimidating perhaps for writers when they're writing a draft and they think it's not good or it's not working or it's not good enough. Obviously, you'd have to know at some point, if you've been banging away at it for 5 years, yes, set that aside and maybe try a different story. But if you've only been working on it for a few months, just push through, finish that draft. There's just something really valuable to be gained by having your first finished draft and then learning the process of revising. It's extremely helpful, but you can't get to that place if you don't finish what you start.
I love that advice, and that was advice given to me by one of my teachers, the novelist Amanda Air Ward. I actually took like a class from her that she teaches here in Austin out of her home, called How to Write a Novel in a Year. And that's her biggest thing is, y'all are going to get in here and you're going to finish a draft, because she gave this cautionary tale that everyone she went, through her MFA program with that didn't finish, that was it for them. But the ones that actually did finish that draft, even if it was bad, they had a shot. And I think you're right. I think there's just something magical about it. Even if it needs a ton of work, it's like there's something that the universe responds to that it's magical. I love that advice. And I guess before we bring John back on and see if there's questions from the audience, I would just love to know what your writing day looks like and what your process looks like when you're actively drafting or under deadline.
Yeah, needless to say, when I'm actively drafting, it's very different than the rest of the time when I probably look like a giant slacker. But when I'm drafting, now admittedly, 2021 did throw off my process quite a bit. Because typically when I'm drafting, like, I will work 6 days a week. Sometimes I'll work 11 or 12 days in a row without a day off, because I just really, really want to get that first draft done. And it can be very frustrating. The first draft is both the best time and the worst time in certain ways. But again, it's got to get done. It's like you don't have anything until you have that draft done. 2020 did mess with my process, and I'd never really experienced before, like, setting aside a book, a first draft, sometimes for weeks at a time, sometimes for a few months at a time, just because of stuff that was happening in life. But I discovered it wasn't bad, that wasn't a bad process, because I was still thinking about my book during the time that I wasn't writing it. And it actually allowed me to write the first draft of my current project with a little more knowledge about what was happening. Because often I don't really know. I'm just kind of floundering my way through, but I had enough breaks that I could actually make some serious decisions about what was happening. So now I don't know. I don't know going forward, like, do I continue to do the 2020 style or do I go back to my old style? I'm not sure yet.
Well, whatever you do works. So I guess one last question. Can you give us any hints on what you're working on now, or do you want to keep that secret?
Yeah, I probably have to keep it secret. I think it just went to my editor like yesterday or the day before. So don't know what's up with that yet. And then I have another project that I can't say very much about, but I'm going to be publishing a novella in 2022. And it's going to be a little bit off-brand for me. I'll just say this. It's kind of a dark fairy tale.
Oh, I love it. Oh, I love it already.
It's a very important story to me. It's very much a parable. And hopefully next year I can talk about it some more, but that's all I'll say for now.
That's so exciting. I love it. Well, let's bring John back on and see if the audience has some questions.
All right. So you guys have covered some of them that have popped up, but before we get into them, May, you've been so great to lead the discussion tonight. Can you tell everybody a little bit about the Hunting Wives?
Yeah, sure. So the Hunting Wives, I was just going to grab it real quick. It follows Sophie O'Neill, who is a young mother and wife, and she's ditched her glossy job in Chicago as a magazine editor, and she's moved to rural Texas. And she wants to raise her toddler like in this idyllic kind of like, farm to table type existence. But when she gets there, she's bored out of her skull, and it turns out that the grass is not greener, it's boringly green, and she soon falls under the spell of this alluring socialite named Margot Banks, who leads up this secret clique of, it's like an all-female shooting club known as the Hunting Wives, and they gather on the weekends, they drink too much, and they get up to no good. So it's just sort of an adults behaving badly mixed with murder and obsession type of book with crazy Texas women.
Awesome. And so you asked Zoya, but you did not answer. May, what have you read lately that you've enjoyed?
Right now, at this very moment, I am reading Bathhouse by P.J. Vernon. And
so good.
Oh my God, I'm so gripped. I'm actually hoarse because I stayed up past my bedtime last night reading it, and I didn't get enough sleep. And yeah, that one is blowing my mind. So that sticks out. And I just read We Were Never Here by Andrea Bartz, and I love that too. And yeah, those are my top two ones that are recent in my brain.
I've been telling people Bathhouse is like just the like ridiculous banana pants thriller that you just want to just like completely devour in like one sitting. It's so fun.
Yes, it is.
So Ed wants to know, he said, Zoya, how much importance do you place on choosing the first names of your character? He says he finds it very interesting. Imogen is such a beautiful Irish name. So how important are names for you when you're creating characters?
Names are pretty important. For one thing, because I'm going to be writing the name like 500 times, and I'm going to be thinking of that character by that name. And one of the other things I always think about, I don't know if I was completely successful with Getaway. I try to pick first names that are easy to pronounce so that people don't end up with the situation they have with my name, Zoya. And I also, especially with something like Getaway, where I have 3 female main characters, try to have names that are very different from each other so that it's easier to get to know them. But yeah, I give a fair amount of thought actually into names. I know sometimes some of my books have kind of quirky names that people think are weird, but there's always a reason for my madness.
How about you, May? Anything to add with naming characters?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of like Zoya. Like I really try to come up with distinct names that, will stick with you. And I find that I can't really write a character until I come up with their name, because it imbues so much of their personality. Like, Stephanie is such a different name than Margot. Margot just screams like murder and badness. And no offense to any Margos out there, y'all are awesome, but you're murderers. No,
the young adult author Caleb Rohrig has a character named Margot, who is a socialite who leads a ring of drag queen jewel thieves. So maybe there's something to that theory there.
Oh, I love it.
So Trisha wants to know, this is for both of you, but we'll start with Zoje. Is there a scene that you've written that was just so much fun to create that you wish you could go back and write it again for the first time?
I would say not in Getaway. There were a lot of hard scenes in Getaway. I'm trying to think if there's anything that was. I don't know. That's a strange question to answer, because when you write a scene and you really like it, there is a sort of magic that happens in that moment, and it's extremely rewarding to experience. But part of that magic is you didn't know it was going to happen. So I think that magic has to just kind of happen spontaneously. So I guess I wouldn't necessarily want to go back and have a scene be new again. I just hope that I will continue to have scenes that feel magical and that I can experience that.
How about you, May?
There was one scene in The Hunting Wives that takes place around a pool, and a lot of drama and craziness happens, and that was really fun to write. There's a lot of drinking in that book. Like, I can't keep up with those women anymore. That was me in my 20s. So that was fun to like write that kind of stuff, because it was like a wish fulfillment. I'm now middle-aged and a mom, and I can't do it anymore. So yeah, that pool scene, that was fun. Anyway, that's kind of a dorky example, but yeah.
So let's talk about titles for a minute. Do you guys come up with your own titles? I imagine coming up with titles for thrillers has to be tricky, because they're generally short, a lot of times just a couple of words, and you have just a couple of words to kind of give people an idea what the book is. But then you also have to come up with a couple of words that aren't too similar to the same couple of words that other people have used. So what is your title process like? Do you have a working title when you're working on something and you just know it's going to change, or do you have like a title and you're like, I have to have this title, this is what it's going to be? Let's start with Zoje.
Yeah, I always have a working title. Often I know that working title is going to change. I don't remember what the first draft of Baby Teeth was called. I mean, at the point that I called it Baby Teeth, like, I really, really wanted it to be called Baby Teeth. Wonderland, that was always its title. That was even its working title. With Getaway, it had a working title that I knew I couldn't keep because it was a little bit artsy fartsy. But I always make a list of titles, of alternate titles, because I know the conversation is going to happen. And Getaway was my first choice of the alternates. So I'm really happy. All of my books have been called what I really did want them to be called. So it's worked out well.
And how about you, May?
Yeah, same here. I mean, for me, titles are kind of like character names. I really do have to settle on a title before I want to get too far into writing it. And it's funny though, when I started The Hunting Wives, it was called The Hunting Party, which we all know is a Lucy Foley novel, and a great one at that. And I was so smitten with that title. And then I was on Twitter one day and I saw like she posted, oh, my ARCs are here, and it was The Hunting Party, and I was like, oh no, how am I ever gonna come up with it? And my husband, thank goodness, came up with The Hunting Wives as an alternate. But I do try to settle on a title from the outset, but knowing that there might be conversations with my editor that, we might need to change it here or there. So
The Hunting Wives is a great title, by the way, and an awesome cover too. The second I saw that cover, when it's like 6 months ahead of publication, I was like, oh, that's going to be a big book, because that was just such an awesome combination.
Thank you so much. I'm really, the credit goes to my husband for the title and the cover. The art department really knocked it out. I love it too. It's gorgeous.
So Susan wants to know, this is going to be for both of you, but we'll start with Zoje. What 3 fictional characters would you invite to dinner if you could?
Oh gosh. I'm always so bad at these kind of questions, and partly because I have such a bad memory. It's like, do I remember the names of anyone?
Yeah.
And then maybe it's also because when I imagine books in my head, I don't know, like those aren't really people I want to hang out with that much. I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm going to have to think about this because I'm not sure.
How about you, May?
Yeah, that's a tough one, but a good one. Let's see. I just recently read Riley Sager's latest, Survive the Night, and I feel like his protagonist, Charlie, and I would really get along, so I'd love to hang out with her.
Just not on a road trip.
What'd you say?
Just not on a road trip.
Yeah, definitely not on a road trip. Definitely not on a road trip. Another one of my favorite novels is The Jet Setters by Amanda Ward, and one of her main characters is a widow, and there was something so compelling about her. Her name is, I think it's Charlotte Perkins. I want to go have drinks with her on the cruise ship that the novel is set. And those are 2 answers. And I guess I don't have any of Tana French's characters except for the killers. The detectives, yeah, I wanna have a pint of Guinness with all those people.
Yes, I'd like to join you for that. That would be good.
Okay, let's do it.
And Zoje, so you mentioned that you weren't quite ready to talk about what was coming up next, but how about you, May? Are you ready to talk about what we might see from you next?
Yeah, I am. My next thriller, it's going to come out May, tentatively, of 2022, and it's called My Summer Darlings, and it's about 3 lifelong friends that live back in their East Texas neighborhood that they grew up in, and all is well until a sexy, dangerous stranger moves into town, and they each become obsessed with them, and he upends their lives over the course of a summer. So I'm excited about that, and we'll see. I hope to see you in person, John. Like,
fingers crossed.
Oh yeah.
I know we were so optimistic in June when we were like, oh yeah, by September we can get a couple things, and yeah, it was a rough day last week when we decided that we were going to pull the plug on stuff. So yeah, that means everybody do what we need to do so we can get some in-store book events. We were lucky enough to have May swing by and sign copies for us, which was nice. But yeah, we definitely would love to have a store full of people to celebrate the new book.
Yeah.
All right. So I think so. Unless you thought of somebody else that you want to potentially hang out with, which if you don't, that's totally fine. I think that is going to do it for us this evening. But so just to recap, for anybody who might have joined us late, we have been chatting with May Cobb, whose most recent release, The Hunting Wives, came out in May, and Zoje Stage, whose book Getaway just came out last week. If you missed any part of our conversation, you can rewatch them on the store's Facebook and YouTube channels. You can, if you want to hear May talk more about The Hunting Wives, we did an event with her and Amy Gentry when it came out. So all of those are available on the store's YouTube channel. Zoje, did you do a conversation with us with another author too? I feel like maybe you did.
I haven't. No, this is my first conversation with you.
Oh, yeah. Well, okay. So yeah, so there's a wealth of great author events out there to rewatch. As we mentioned before, we are open. So if you want either author's books or their previous ones, you can come visit us. We're happy to mail as well. We dropped links to those as well as the books that they had been mentioning in the comments. So both of you, thank you so much for joining this evening. I hope you guys have a good night, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks,
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Good night.
Good night.